If India-Canada relations could get any worse, well then, they just did. Justin Trudeau made an astonishing claim standing up in Canada's parliament to accuse India of eliminating a Khalistani terrorist on Canadian soil. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Justin Trudeau just went back home a few days ago, it seems, from India after a frosty meeting and a bit of a debacle visit to India for the G20, including having his plane grounded and another one diverted to London. But that was not really controversial. What has come today is an astonishing claim from the Canadian leader, claiming on the floor of Canada's parliament that agents of India, quote unquote, are responsible for the elimination of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Nijjar, someone who is a designated terrorist according to India's security agencies. India has dismissed this claim as absolutely absurd and motivated. A foreign ministry statement says that the claim is designed to deflect from Canada's patronage of terrorists and extremists. The statement is an extremely sharp one and talks about the refuge given to murderers, terrorists, and human traffickers in Canada. Canada expelled an Indian diplomat, and India summoned the Canadian High Commissioner and also expelled a top diplomat. Is there any sort of room to come back from this moment as the relationship stands completely on the brink? Trudeau is reaching out to other Western powers. The Americans and the Australians have issued a pretty vague sounding statement saying they're deeply concerned. How much worse could this get? Let's introduce our panel of experts on the program today. Joining us from Canada, someone who's been warning that an inflection point is coming for India and Canada, and perhaps that inflection point is here. Author and expert on Khalistani terrorism, Terry Milewski, is with us. It's good to have you back with us, Terry. And good morning where you are. It's up and early in Canada. Also joining us is Yashovardhan Azad. Mr. Azad, of course, knows more than a thing or two about sleuthing, can't really reveal everything, but this is an astonishing claim for one country to make of the other. And as I said, India has already dismissed it. Also joining us on the diplomatic implications is Ambassador Dilip, Sinha, veteran diplomat. And also joining us is Sherveer Panag, who is, of course, in his day job as a lawyer, but has spent all of Twitter today arguing with sundry Canadian extremists on why this is something. This is a moment that is actually, somebody I think called it a unity day for India. There is such visceral dislike, I think, for the patronage offered to Khalistani extremists in Canada. Welcome, everybody. Just going to start by playing those 17 seconds. While India was asleep, this is what Trudeau was claiming. This is an excerpt of his speech in Canada's parliament.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
All right, that was just the 17 seconds, and a more detailed statement followed, of course, from Canada's foreign minister. Let's listen to that before we open our discussion.
First and foremost, I would like to extend my condolences to the family and loved ones of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The allegations that a representative of a foreign government may have been involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen here in Canada, on Canadian soil, is not only troubling, but it is completely unacceptable. If proven true, this would be a grave violation of our sovereignty and of the most basic rule of how countries deal with each other. We've been clear, we will not tolerate any form of foreign interference. Since this was brought to our attention, we've been guided by three principles. The first one, we will seek the truth. The second one, we will protect Canadians at all times. And thirdly, we will protect Canada's sovereignty. I've conveyed these principles to my Indian counterparts, and I've also told him that we expect India's full collaboration to make sure that we get to the bottom of this. And as of today, and as a consequence, we've expelled a top Indian diplomat from Canada.
And a top Canadian diplomat was expelled after the summoning of the Canadian High Commissioner, Ambassador Dilip Sinha. In many ways, this was coming. Did you think it would manifest itself like this, in this fashion? These are conversations that usually take place through press statements or behind closed doors. It's quite extraordinary that Trudeau had to stand up in Canada's parliament and make this comment. What did you make of it?
Well, Trudeau has clearly gone back very peeved with the kind of treatment he got here in India. His meeting with Prime Minister Modi was frosty, and the treatment our media gave him was also very torrid and difficult. And on top of it, his aircraft conked off. So he had a difficult time in India. He's gone back and he's wreaking revenge. Now, look at his allegation. He says that they are credible allegations. He doesn't even say they're credible evidence. He says they're credible allegations that government of India may have been involved. And on this basis, he has chosen to expel a top Indian diplomat on the allegation that on the basis that Canada's sovereignty is not to be played around with, which is absolutely true. Nobody's playing around with Canada's sovereignty here. But people in Canada are playing around with India's sovereignty. And with that, Prime Minister Trudeau has no difficulty at all. Right now, there are hoardings in Canada calling for the assassination of 3 Indian diplomats whose photographs are pasted on those hoardings. And Mr. Trudeau has no difficulty with that. He's quite comfortable with that. That is how I suppose he conducts diplomatic relations with other countries. But if on the basis of credible allegations, as he says, he has gone ahead and expelled diplomats. Now it's up to him to produce the evidence in his own courts. And if he cannot prove those allegations, then he jolly well resign.
You're saying that if Trudeau cannot show the world or show India evidence, he should step down, though,
Absolutely.
his numbers are pretty low anyway.
Well, yes, no, he has accused a foreign country of carrying out an assassination on his soil on the basis of allegations. Well, of course, he has to go to his own courts and produce that evidence. And let's see if that evidence, whatever evidence he has, stands up to the judicial scrutiny of his own courts. And let's see what happens thereafter. But right now, it's only allegations. So we'll see what evidence he has.
Yeah, so let me actually get in Terry, who's been warning that something is going to tip over in the relation, and that's happened today, Terry. And you kept saying, well, how far is India willing to go? Trudeau isn't the only problem. Trudeau's opposition also isn't going to necessarily take a very strong position. But given what Trudeau's just done, I don't see any simple coming back from this. You heard Ambassador Sinha right now saying, look, either prove it or quit. How's this going down in Canada, Terry?
The ambassador is correct. The key word is evidence. Let's face it, Mr. Trudeau has produced no evidence. To date, he has got provisional support on the basis that, well, if true, yes, we support the government, from the opposition. But let's remember that this whole thing starts with the assumption, on the basis of no evidence at all, by the Khalistani forces worldwide, that simply because there were a series of deaths of Khalistanis around the world, one in Pakistan probably was a drug deal gone bad, one in a hospital in Birmingham, England, where the gentleman apparently had leukemia, blood cancer. It wasn't because he was the subject of a hit by the Indian government. And then thirdly, on June 18th, Mr. Nijjar, Hardeep Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia. That's the one which did look like obviously a murder, a gangland hit. 2 men, masked men, run off in a getaway car, then they find the car burning. It's a routine. It happens every weekend in Surrey, and it looked a lot like a typical gangland hit in British Columbia. However, beyond the coincidence of these deaths, which don't seem related once you take a look at them, no evidence has ever been produced ever since that June 18th murder by the Khalistanis to say why they conclude that it's a fact, apparently according to them, that it's a fact that India carried out these murders. Now that Trudeau has climbed on board that bandwagon, he has got to say in the days ahead, and pretty quick too, I think, what is the evidence exactly? Now he's going to say, well, it's classified, we can't do that.
Yeah. Can I ask you though, Terry, when you first said that you thought this was internal gang warfare between different Khalistani rival groups, and you said that to me in July, yes. Nijjar is killed in June. We are now in September. right? Why is Trudeau talking about this today? Ambassador Sinha says it's because he's had a hell of a poor visit in India. What do you think it is?
Well, I think the ambassador is correct again. I think that what's happened is that Trudeau has been badly humiliated. He was basically given a diplomatic punch in the nose by Modi. It was very public and very embarrassing. Never mind the business with the plane. This was a serious embarrassment. He was being accused directly by Modi of harboring people in Canada who are threatening to harm Indian diplomats. People who are painting targets on the backs of these diplomats. So Trudeau is now saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to fight back. He's cornered. I think he's a little bit desperate. He reached the polls too, and he's looking for a way out of this mess. And if he were able to show the Canadian public and the world that he's got them, that he's got the evidence, that his case is going to stand up, and remember, it's going to have to stand up in court. If they're going to have to charge somebody, they're going to have to say, who, what, when, where, how was this done? And if he can't do that in short order, well, the Indians would be crazy not to exploit that. Remember that the Indians know what Trudeau thinks he knows. They had a meeting at the G20 in New Delhi. Trudeau and Modi both say that this was raised. Well, obviously he's got to say, look, we're not just blowing smoke. We've got evidence that your guy did this and that, or that he paid the contract killers, blah, blah, blah. So the Indians, if Trudeau doesn't say it, the Indians will.
Yeah, I just want to flag as I get in Yashovardhan, Azad, and then Sherbi next, is that while the G20 was happening in New Delhi, you actually had Khalistani separatists, secessionists addressing a rally. Can we actually switch to that newspaper headline, because it's just far too inflammatory to play that video, where they're calling for the political death of Amit Shah and the Prime Minister. So these are the kind of rallies we've seen before, posters that have called for, literally a marked Indian diplomats. We've seen tableaux celebrating the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and Pannu in attendance. Khalistanis openly called for the political death, as they called it, for the Prime Minister and the Home Minister of India. So this is, and also here's another speech, not playing with the sound up, where Hindus go back to India. These are the kind of inflammatory, inciting violence, separatism speeches. That's the tableau that celebrated the assassination of Indira Gandhi. So, I mean, you can't, Mr. Azad, the one thing Indians seem to unite on, while we disagree on so much else, is how we feel about Trudeau and Canada's patronage of Khalistanis. What do you make of this? I also worry for the Indian diplomat who's been expelled. His name has been outed. There's literally a mark on his back.
Yes. Before this, let me just make a very small comment on the investigation. It's very strange that the two masked men who have allegedly attacked Nijjar and killed him, they have not been arrested yet. And yet the minister says that she has expelled the diplomat and says that we will seek the truth. And the other, by expelling the diplomat, you've already arrived at the truth, it appears, whereas you're saying that you have not even arrested those masked men. So I don't know, if you're talking about credible allegations, there are credible allegations, as Terry has just pointed out, about the gang war over there. And Ripudaman Malik's killing is also something which is still being discussed as to who has done it. What about the drugs? What about the Sikh organizations involved in which have appeared as the tallest in terms of criminal activities in Canada? Now, the second part of your question, which is the secessionist activity in Canada, I think Canada is on a weak wicket. This kind of secessionism is not allowed anywhere. In fact, a few years back, in 2017 or 2018, Trudeau himself had attended one of the rallies where there were floats and where there were, slogans emblazoned all over about in 1984, and the threat to the diplomats. Now, in Canada itself, hate speech is an offense. Incitement is an offense. So one expected at least that the cases would be registered for these offenses or these statements against the diplomats. So they have not been done so far. Now, as far as the expulsion of the diplomat is concerned, I'm pretty surprised because as everyone has pointed out so far, there has been no credible evidence even. So what we have done in return, I think it's a good quid pro quo.
But clearly the matter isn't ending here. I see Suhasini has joined us. Let me bring in Sherbir and then go straight to Suhasini. Sherbir, I know you spent all morning arguing, and as a Sikh, there's so much more sort of pressure on you from some of these extremists, which is horrible. I mean, I can imagine only what they say to you. I've seen some of those comments, and you've been trolled for them. It's hateful speech that you've been subjected to. Do go ahead with your thoughts today.
Thank you, Barkha. Barkha, I think there are three dimensions to look at as far as this is concerned, and I'm just going to sort of go in order of where I started this morning and also some of the points that have been covered. I think first and foremost is the element of the domestic pandering of the Trudeau government to the Indian diaspora, specifically the Sikh diaspora in Canada through their actions. The speeches that have followed in Parliament, especially of Mr. Jagmeet Singh, clearly demonstrating that this is significantly that this is domestic electoral politics, and the fact that this is domestic electoral politics at play. The fact that the Canadian Prime Minister, on credible allegations, not credible evidence, has taken certain steps by making it sound like there's a conclusion when in fact there's an investigation that he's asking for. It's muddled. It's completely muddled messaging as far as this is concerned. Secondly, I think it's this dichotomous stand that the Canadian government has been taking, not just now, whether it's due to domestic politics or otherwise, is about conflating on one part liberal values on freedom of speech and on the other part terrorism. We've had instances of several Indian nationals who are threatened in India. There have been those residing in Canada who have orchestrated hits in India. Whether we are talking about parades where you just put images of those taboos that have been paraded, posters, folks who've sort of gone above and beyond what Canada and its allies would clearly term as terrorism. There cannot be a double standard when there's a direct impact on Canadian soil and a complete soil, and a completely different standard when it becomes applicable to India. And I think that becomes part two. And I think part three is the multiple contradictions within the Sikh diaspora in Canada. As I've mentioned on multiple times before and on this show as well, Barkha, there is an entire ecosystem on getting immigration based on a victimization basis, and then after generation to generation is sort of living that lie where merely because somebody was a member was associated with Mr. Simranjeet Singh Mann, they're able to get asylum. Well, Mr. Simranjeet Singh Mann is serving in our parliament. All his other thoughts and other aspects completely aside, I'm not joining two issues there. Here, somebody is seeking asylum on the basis of some Fox prosecution. There are 3 to 4 complex narratives that emerge, but most unbecoming of the Canadian government. It clearly is a double standard when it comes to matters of violence and terrorism. It's true. I'm going to use a very crude Punjabi phrase, which is Tuada kutta Tommy, te sada kutta kutta. And that is something.
Yeah, it's double standards, it's hypocrisy, and I think we all hear you. So Hasni, Terry has to leave, so I'm just going to squeeze in a quick last word from him and come to you right after that, because I think he's being chased by multiple journalists at this point. This has become a big global controversy. Terry, just a last thought: how much worse do you see this getting, and do you think that Trudeau will be able to take this forward? Because as everybody on this panel has said, basis what they're calling credible allegations, they have expelled an Indian diplomat. What next?
It's only going to get worse before it gets better. I'm quite confident of that, because we still have to have the battle that is coming over. Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? That's going to be the question. Now, if Trudeau comes up with real evidence that causes everyone to sit back and say, oh, we've misjudged this, there really is evidence. The Indians were involved in murdering this man on Canadian soil, then that will change everything, of course, and it'll escalate even further. But if he fails, then I wonder about his political future. It could be another Indian fiasco for the Prime Minister, and it could finish him. It might be his last fiasco in power.
Well, you've been saying for a while that Trudeau's time is up, and you think this in a way accelerates or could accelerate that process unless he can jump back from it. Terry, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much. Thank you, Terry. Jump right in, Suhasini. Diplomatic challenges for the handling of this. There are two narratives I'm hearing. One, Ambassador Sinha just said Trudeau was really sulky because of the way his India visit went. He's doing this both for domestic reasons and to get back at India. Another narrative is that obviously India would have known that this was coming. Trudeau says he raised it with the Prime Minister. He said it in Delhi. He's gone back to Canada and said it. What are the diplomatic ramifications of what is unfolding right now? Suhasini Haidar.
Well, certainly it is a heated moment. What we are looking at is not just the expulsion of the diplomats on both sides. Look at the statements that have been made on both sides. The Canadian side saying this is a violation of Canadian sovereignty, that this is a violation of international law. Of course, and it's absolutely true, Canada still has to prove this. One hopes that a prime minister of a country doesn't stand in as parliament makes a statement without having really, really good basis for it. And now we have heard from Australia as well as from the US saying they are aware of the Canadian allegations, that they are deeply concerned, whatever that means. The second is from the Indian side. Not only has there been the expulsion of diplomats, the Ministry of External Affairs has actually said that we are concerned about Canadian diplomats being involved in anti-India activities in India, which means this is not where it ends, that there are others in the line, others that are under scrutiny. I think over the weekend, one of the columns called Canada, India's new Pakistan. One has to remember that while such name-calling, expulsion of diplomats, this kind of relationship is quite common in the India-Pakistan context. In the Indian-Canadian context, you're dealing with a very different kind of relationship. And you're dealing with a country that is in the Western Hemisphere, a member of NATO, but also a country where hundreds of thousands of Indian citizens, as well as Canadian citizens of Indian origin, live. So I don't think this is the best time to just, get into what is obvious. What is obvious is India's real concerns over the Khalistani separatist violent movement that have been around for decades, that have kept India-Canada relations in the deep freezer for 4 decades. I mean, from the early 80s to 2010, we had no prime ministerial visit. In 2010, we had Prime Minister Manmohan Singh go for a multilateral visit. Prime Minister Modi was the first, and he kept saying it, I am the first Prime Minister to come for a bilateral visit to Canada in so many decades. So the fact is that relations have been in the deep freeze over decades for a reason. We seem to have not been able to sort out problems in these last 9 years or 8 years since Prime Minister Modi visited Canada for the first time. And even though there was a plan for a reset earlier this year, the Canadian Foreign Minister made 2 trips to Delhi. Obviously, events in June have changed it. But just one more point, the idea that this is about one person's peak or India's, snub to Canada. I think one must remember that these events happened in June, where the Canadian government had already begun an investigation, it claimed, on foreign interference in Canadian elections. So at that time, when this killing of Nijjar, who is a wanted man in India, who's been banned, whose organization's been banned, and he has been named a terrorist, when this occurred, things were already about to get heated again. The fact is, 3 weeks ago, Canada announced, and it was our High Commissioner to Canada who actually made it public, Canada had asked for a pause in the India-Canada FTA because of the current political trouble in the relationship. This predates the G20 visit. So I think we need, I come on your show and I always say the same thing, which is we need a little more transparency on just what has happened. What is the kind of evidence Prime Minister Trudeau claims to have given in no uncertain terms to Prime Minister Modi when he was here? Why did neither side talk about what they had discussed over Nijjar at all in either of the two readouts. And eventually, if there is credible evidence to what Canada says it's worried about, is India going to cooperate, help in that investigation? And is Canada going to actually accept it is wrong if it doesn't have all the evidence that it claims to have? So I think there are a lot of these questions still out there, and this is not the moment just to make it, more heated.
So let's actually take that to Ambassador Sinha. Suhasini making the argument that we cannot actually simplify it only to how the G20 went. These troubles existed earlier. Canada unilaterally suspended the trade talks. Nijjar was killed in June. The murmurs of a so-called India hand, these allegations started actually in July. In the meantime, these inflammatory Khalistani rallies, open calls for violence against the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, all of this has continued. Indian diplomats, attacks on the consulate, all of this has continued. This has been a low simmer conflict. And I agree with Suhasini that there have been these parallels with Pakistan. But Suhasini, it's equally true, and you're on the beat, so you would know this. Please correct me if I'm wrong, that Canadians have been probably summoned more times in the last year than the Pakistanis. So what is actually going on here, Ambassador Sinha? And the point being made that let's not link it only to G20. What would you say to that?
No, I totally agree with the point that India-Canada relations have been simmering for quite some time now. In fact, they go back to the late 1970s or mid-1970s, when Canada's asylum policy, which was originally designed to take in asylum seekers from East Europe, from the communist countries, was used by people to migrate from India to Canada and a few other European countries. And they got a whole, as Shagil mentions, a whole ecosystem of evidence being produced of persecution in India, and then that whole thing started. And then, of course, you had the Blue Star, and then you had the bombing of the Air India aircraft. Now, when the bombing took place in 1985, Canada took no action at all against that. It was only after 9/11, when America started putting pressure upon Canada and other countries to take action against terrorism, that Canada passed the Anti-Terrorism Act, and then finally made some perfunctory arrests. And one person was eventually convicted, but two others were acquitted. The person convicted actually confessed that he had carried out manslaughter, and therefore he was punished. So the Canadian agencies and the police did not cover themselves in glory over the investigation of the bombing. Now, thereafter, tensions have been there. Now, what prompted this particular step being taken by Prime Minister Trudeau seems to have been prompted by what happened at the G20 meeting here, because of the personal pique between him and the treatment that he got here, both from our government and from our media, which made him go back. Now, he's not talking about evidence. He's not talking about credible allegations. He has produced nothing. No action has been taken by his police authorities against any accused. And these kinds of killings have been going on in Canada for a number of years. And Ritu Daman Singh Malik was killed last year. No action has been taken against anybody who killed him, nor any allegations about India's involvement in that. So out of the blue, now the Canadian government has expelled an Indian diplomat, not because that particular diplomat is involved in the killing, but as a consequence of the allegations, they have chosen to expel one diplomat. But this is an extreme step and an extreme provocation to pick on a diplomat only because the country is being accused of being involved in a killing, which is a serious enough allegation in itself.
But I'm wondering what's the end. I'm wondering what's the end game. But I'm glad you mentioned Air India, because I want to bring in Sherbeer and Azad on that, and then Suhasini can pick up on some of your points. I mean, this Air India bombing, there were Canadian citizens on it as well. How is there, and then you think about the fact that there's just some collective amnesia about this Air India bombing, Sherbeer.
Absolutely, Barkha. I think the track record of not just the Kanishka bombing, but subsequent events as well of Canadian soil being used to sponsor terrorist activities. The clampdown, and just to draw a parallel, when there was a farmers' protest in Canada, there were reports of bank accounts being frozen of those who were protesting, and several fairly adverse and coercive measures being deployed in that to subdue that protest. So it's not a question of mere will. And look, I'm not trying to conflate different issues. I'm trying to bring out the fact that there has been no polity stroke government will when it comes to prosecuting these matters. They have pandered to a domestic audience. That domestic audience has now become sizable and has translated into an electorate, and therefore there's been no serious intent. And the unfortunate element of there being lack of intent on the Canadian side is significant consequences for us in India, is specifically in Punjab. The amount of false narratives that get peddled, the amount of false statistics that get peddled through different organizations out there, it's absolutely shocking. And I think Ambassador Sinha has given a very interesting timeline of the evolution of Canada's asylum policy, and to harp on, and not to sound like a broken record, but the abuse of immigration and asylum policies in Canada, which have been readily done, and the fact that they create a further electorate, is an alarming situation for us. And we are the ones bearing the consequences in a state that's been through a lot. And this shouldn't take away from what we need to do back in India, but this was a matter where the Canadian government ought to have cooperated with the Indian government on a matter as universal as terrorism, as in we cannot have some definitions of terrorism.
Yeah, let me actually remind everybody that it was Trudeau's father, and I think Terry had told us this earlier, but my producer's note actually says that it was Pierre Trudeau's government which refused the 1982 Indian request to extradite Talvinder Parmar to India for murder on the grounds apparently that India was insufficiently deferential to the Queen. Yasho, you would remember some of these historical moments that have slipped into the archives and should not have. Yasho Azad.
Absolutely. That was a real heinous incident, and they did not act on the intelligence, and they did not even act later, despite many pleas and despite, lot of parleys, diplomatic parleys and intelligence to intelligence contacts and the contacts with the RCMP. Let me say, Barkha, also another point that obviously Mr. Trudeau has been convinced by some agency of India's hand. And therefore, what he has with him is certainly going to come out just before the elections, because I believe his chances are not very good in the coming election. So this is one of the very, very strong election agendas that he's kept in mind. Secondly, let me also say, I just want to support Dilip's point and also share this, that even Nijjar had gone to Canada as a refugee. And he was a plumber, and he tried various means, marrying somebody, trying to get that immigration. He was rejected. But later on, he was called as a citizen. Now, if our diplomats, seeing the large diaspora, go there for the meetings and see what is happening, there is nothing wrong at all. But a lot of information is being given by various agencies who are inimical. And let me say one thing very, very openly and clearly. The contact with this Khalistani elements with the Pakistani embassy is absolutely clear. It is on record, and this has been brought to the attention of the Canadian authorities also. So not doing anything after an investigation, making an allegation, not being able to support the truth, and supporting secessionism is something which does not lend Canada a very, very good name. So I think they are on a weak wicket on this particular point.
So Hasmi, seen from a diplomatic lens, where do you see it going from here?
Well, certainly, I think Terry Milewski said it right, that it's probably going to get worse before it does get better. I think there's no question that both sides are now priming for something bigger. After all, if these allegations have already been sort of shared with India a week ago, it's likely that both sides are primed for what is going to follow, and it will require some kind of real intervention, maybe by another country, maybe by a high level inside India, to kind of take a step back and say, let's try and address the problem. As you've said on this show again, I don't think there's any doubt that the problem that India faces from separatist violence that is fomented, instigated, incubated in Canada is a long-standing issue which India has raised at many different times in its relationship. But I think there has to be some consideration to, as I said, what that relationship stands for. After all, Canada is a country that is part of the Western Alliance, that does is home to hundreds of thousands of Indians, if not Indian origin Canadians. And from the Indian perspective, that has to be taken into account. For Canada, I do think, yes, Prime Minister Trudeau is in the spot. He has got to be able to go public with some of these allegations that he has made, because it's not possible to just make the allegation and then expect everyone to keep quiet after that. But I do make the point, someone mentioned that he's probably having a tough time with his election. I don't know if you've read the speeches of the Canadian leaders that followed Mr. Trudeau. They were, if anything, even more tough on that position. And Pierre Poilievre, who's one of the main opposition candidates, Jagmeet Singh, another one, made it very clear that they are locking arms with the Trudeau government on this one.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that even Trudeau losing an election is going to change relations.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point, because Terry has been making that point that this problem isn't ending even if Trudeau loses the election. And Ambassador Sinha, to talk about Jagmeet Singh, an ally of the Trudeau government, his tweet today was quite extraordinary for a politician of another country. And if we can bring it up, he actually said, that he commits that there's going to be kind of justice served for this. And he said, I will leave no stone unturned in the pursuit of justice, including holding Narendra Modi accountable. Now, this is kind of extraordinary what's going on here. But the point Suhasini is making is, this is not limited to Trudeau. Trudeau provokes. Trudeau is like a trigger warning for India. But this isn't only about Trudeau. Ambassador Sinha? Yeah.
Trudeau has behaved in a very childish manner. India and Canada have had problems, as I said, for the last 50 years almost. The problem lies in the asylum laws that Canada had, or the Western countries had framed for communist rebels who were leaving the communist countries in the Cold War days. Those laws have been abused, and a whole ecosystem or a whole gang of people have developed in Canada whose task it is to try and see if they can get immigration across from India into Canada on the basis of allegations against the government of India. Now, this is a major problem for India, and India cannot ignore it. But we have been living with this problem over the last so many years. But today, Trudeau has escalated the whole matter by raising it to a point of expelling diplomats. And he's also condoning charge of threats to Indian diplomats there in Canada. He talks about Western values of democracy. Is this the value that you have, that you go and kill diplomats? He can't even uphold respect the basic conventions of the Vienna Convention.
Yeah.
And yet he goes around behaving as if he's morally superior. That is what is the problem today.
What do you think is happening behind the scenes between India and Canada at this point, Ambassador?
Well, I think right now things would be very difficult, because what's happening is that there are personal threats against our Prime Minister, against our Home Minister. Now, this is very serious. And then you have all kinds of allegations that government of India has been accused of killing a Canadian citizen. This again is an extremely serious allegation to level against a government. So relations right now are definitely on a way down. They are going south.
Yeah.
And one hopes that pretty soon something will happen that will arrest that fall. But the Indian community in Canada has to step up and start speaking up for the good relations that should prevail between our two countries. The 300,000 Indian students who are there, the large Indian community that is there, that does not support the idea of a breaking up India or promoting terrorism in India. Well, they should speak up. And the Canadian people, the other Canadians, the ethnic Canadians, they should also speak up for relations.
That last point is an excellent point. Quick last words from Sherbir and Yasho. Sherbir, the fact is that the only sort of imagery in some ways that comes out of the diaspora in Canada are crazy speeches by Pannu, who's talking about Hindus go back to India, who's talking about political deaths to the Indian Prime Minister. But Ambassador Sinha makes the point that there's a large Indian diaspora, and perhaps that needs to be not just vocal, but also vocalized in the media. Sherbir, just unmute yourself, Sherbir. Yeah.
Barkha, the ambassadors made a very pertinent point. And I believe that those voices are there. it's also a question of whether those voices are amplified and whether the Canadian government assists with also spotlighting where and understanding the emotions of the diaspora and not just of one aspect of it. Even for the sake of argument, if there are protests for sovereignty, hypothetically there are, and those are peaceful protests, that's got space. India may disagree with it, but that could be an arguable space. But the fact that that moderate voices do not and those setting a progressive agenda don't get the same degree of protection versus those that are actually undertaking such activities getting the spotlight, and them being allowed to frame both a political agenda and now a foreign policy agenda, I think speaks to a very complex issue that's going to need a significant amount of resolution, and which is also going to be contingent on Indo-Canadian ties in times to come.
I want to just give a last word to Mr. Azad. Sir, if you would speak as an intelligence officer today, what might this mean for the community? Because that's the community that's being pulled in here, right? That's the social media, somewhat childish. Even some Indians have said, oh, it's very excellent if we have done this. There's that kind of commentary. There's concerns about the security of the diplomat, the Indian diplomat who's been expelled. So speaking today as an intelligence officer, how do you look at what might happen next? What the implications of this are?
Let me say that as an intelligence officer, my first observation is that moderate people don't matter at all. And the moderate Indians who live in Canada are least concerned with what is happening, whether about the Khalistani activities or even what is happening to Indo-Canada relations. It's the most vocal community which matters. And that's why the gurdwaras, which are very strong, which get the funding from the Canadian governments, they are at the edge of talking about Indo-Canada relations or Khalistani activities or secessionism. But, I would definitely say one thing, Barkha, that diplomatic parleys must go on. Canada, after all, is a liberal democracy. And if our diplomatic relations or the intelligence relations are a little frozen, let it be retired, diplomats like Dilip or aided by some intelligence officials to keep on talking, because that's a very, very important thing. Because in the heart of hearts, they might be having their domestic compulsions, but they understand the reality. Khalistani activities cannot be supported by any country. And I understand that even if Trudeau loses, we still have a problem. But still, to explain things to them, to give the mountain of evidence the NIA has collected to them at regular intervals would be the correct thing to do right now. This is not the end of it.
Okay, we'll leave it there. I think just with Sherby is one sentence that stays with me. All of you have made excellent points, but the Canada paradox is conflating liberal values with incitement to terrorism and dressing this up as a free speech debate, which truly I think we could all agree that it isn't, but it is complex and talks never stop. They haven't stopped. And that's why I was curious to see what's happening behind the scenes. Maybe right now, nothing. This next move might well have to be Trudeau's. He's got to put his money where his mouth is. And I'm going to say thank you. I think we just lost Suhasini's the sort of visual in any case. So thank you, Suhasini, and to Sherby and to Ambassador Sinha and Yashovardhan. Thank you to our audience. We'll continue to track the story. Thank you for watching. See you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.